In just 6 months of play, we had 489 card options to build a deck. Obviously, less than a quarter of them are the cards that make up the metagame, and the rest are at least questionable to use. The game has always been about power for power's sake, in addition to the rule of constant power increase, or power creep, which is as vital to this game as the sea is to fish. It was a different time. Many children were starting their journeys in CAD games. With this game, the power increase was too fast, but since the audience was young, they got more and more excited with each impactful release that this game introduced. And I won't lie, that would have intrigued me back then too. We've already analyzed 3 different collections that brought increasingly impactful innovations. All this in such a short time. If you haven't watched the previous videos, watch them, because in this 4th episode talking about Pharaoh 7, we'll see how it impacted this game, which was already going at full speed. Released on October 20, 2002, just 1 month after the previous collection, Pharaoh, Servant was created from the OCG collection's Curse of Clouds, released on September 28, 2000 with 52 cards, and then Ice Bible from December 14, 2000 also, with 52 cards. It maintained the structure of 24 boosters per box, each containing 9 cards, and so on. What really matters is its content, and 105 new cards is the CAD pool. So let's increase those 489 to 594 for now. Yes, I say for now because we'll see promo cards coming up. The PSV contains 66 commons, 17 rares, 10 supers, and 10 ultra rares, in addition to the 2 obligatory secret rares, as always. And here's a small spoiler about the next collections. Having secret rares in the box will be the standard until we reach episode 12, Soul of the Duelist. Until then, expect to see 2 secret rares in every episode. Unfortunately, we didn't get any new mechanics, no new features for the game, like the 5 new card types that Spellroller brought in the last episode. But the new cards in this collection shook things up quite a bit. Even so, let's start with the monsters as usual. Well, let's talk about this new, flipped monster, which wasn't as impactful as the Cyber or Morphin from the previous episode, but carries the same name as the latter, Morphin Jar 2nd. Unlike Cyber, which destroys all monsters on the field, this one shuffles them into the deck. Both players draw cards equal to the number of monsters shuffled by this effect and the special summon. Level 4 or lower flipped monsters in defense position, if they draw any of them. Cyber allows you to keep the cards drawn in your hand. This cheap copy forces you to discard what wasn't special summoned. In other words, it's a downgrade compared to Cyber. But don't be fooled. Despite Morphin 2 being a worse version of Cyber, its usefulness is still great, mainly because of a new type of deck that I will present later. Second. Besides, of course, this jar is a good option for stall and burning decks. Hayabusa Knight and Gifrid on Knight are interesting monsters. The first can attack twice in each battle phase, and the second destroys all spells equipped to it. For example, Hayabusa Knight has a low attack of only 1,000 points, but remember, we have of the spare, a monster that attacks twice with 2,000 attack points for this era shouldn't be underestimated. Duels can be finished with it in an instant. Now the case of Gearfred is even more interesting. You might think it would only be usable because its effect prevents it from being targeted by a fearsome snell. But that's not why I'm mentioning it here. There will be a card that uses it for a certain combo in the future. Nothing too serious. Relax. When that equipment card is released, I'll explain it better. For now, how about we talk about a great addition to beta decks? Goblin Attack Force was at that moment the level 4 monster with the highest attack in the game, 2300, practically a Gaia from First Night, but without the need to sacrifice monsters. It has an effect of going into defense mode for 2 turns after attacking, but it's not really useful for staying on the field, only at most as a way to intimidate the opponent before sacrificing it for summer school. Another cool addition was Find Mega Cyber, which has the effect of special summoning itself if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters Item. A great novelty for its first monster that can be special summoned easily, or at least that doesn't require any resource expenditure reduce. Like, it's not a summer school in terms of stats, but if you have it in your hand and your opponent controls 2 or more monsters, you could tribute summon it quickly. Beat is growing, adapting, and getting stronger. Isina, King Skull, being the king of Beatdown, was the monster that defined the deck at that time. And what's funny is that the name of this collection is called Servant of the Pharaoh. Yuki himself used King Skull in the anime several times, so it really fits the title. Even more so than Dark Magician, because King Skull is just as strong, and much easier to summon. But what if I told you that now the Pharaoh has a new servant? One that replaced Summer School in the metame. Yes, the time has come for the crown of the King of Beatdown to be passed to a new sovereign. His name is Jinzu. I know some people will comment, Jinzu belongs to Joy, you idiot! But none of that matters, because it's Yugi on the box cover, not Joy. And when it comes to the C game, Jinzu is literally what Beatdown needed, a monster to attack safely without worrying about traps. I say this because that's precisely its effect, Yeti. Negate all active traps on the field, and no player can activate them while this monster is on the field. That is, Trap Hole, Mirror Force, Wabuckle, Ultimate Offering, and many other traps are useless against Jinzo, with the only exceptions being Solemn Judgment and Honor of Life. But nobody uses that thing, Oil. However, these cards would only work because they negate the summoning of Jinzo. Only those two, and no others. Despite Jinzo having 100 more attack points than Jinzo, the mere effect of not being able to use traps is a huge bonus for the game. What good is it to summon a Skull King if your opponent activates a Trap Roller to get rid of it or destroy it like Mirror Force or Force? The mere fact of being able to use these and many other cards makes Jinzo worthy of the crown as the current king of Beatdown, indeed. And from now on, every deck focused on this strategy will be led by him. Long live the new great servant of the Pharaoh. And before you ask, which of the Black Flowers searches for genes as well, not just some. So you literally lose nothing by making that substitution in your beloved beta. Regarding metagame monsters, Yuku uses demons to focus more on machines, but spells can never be missing. We had some very interesting ones introduced in this collection. Nobleman of Crossout and Nobleman of Stemination. They banish cards on the field. Crossout banishes monsters in face-down defense mode. If the target is a face-down monster, you can look in your opponent's deck and banish other copies of that monster at high. Stemination banishes face-down trap spells. And if the target is a trap, you can also look in your opponent's deck and banish other traps with the same name. As I said in the previous video, banishing cards, or removing them from the game as it was in the old text, is the solution to avoid using cards that recover resources from the graveyard. That's why these two Noblins were excellent additions, not as present or necessary as the Mass Destruction ones, but they will be used from time to time, especially in decks. A powerful tool for the already dreaded Bit a Cold Wave. This true freezing wave prevents you and your opponent from activating spells and traps until the next turn. However, you can only activate it at the beginning of your turn. Literally the first card you must activate. But this restriction doesn't prevent it from being extremely strong. Perfect for you to do your 1-turn OTK without worrying too much. You doubt it? Then look at this. Limited Removal is the material proof that supports my statement about Genes, the protagonist of this collection that Yoke has traded monsters for machines that out guns. It's a quick spell that doubles the attack of all machine monsters you control. And in the end phase, destroy all those monsters affected by this effect. Again, a quick spell which can be activated at the last minute in the battle phase, at the beginning of the turn, or during the opponent's turn. With one of these, you control a Dinzuzu and Mechanical Chaser on the field, which are the two best machines in the game, and also two of the strongest monsters. In your standby phase, you activate it, and in the main phase 1, you activate Card Wave and go straight to the battle phase without worrying about anything. Good luck to the opponent, who had to deal with a 4800 attack Genes and a 3700 attack Mechanical Chaser. If they don't have any monsters on the field, it's over. Guaranteed OTK. Machines, in general, will be very spoiled from now on. Limit removal is just the beginning of the technological empire in Yu-Gi-Oh! Moving away from the overpowered and into the convoluted, Ground Collapse is a special case. It's not a staple or anything too strong, but it's one of the many tools that those hateful, stall-burn players can use, disrupting the opponent's game. With 3 of them on the field, they can't even summon monsters if they don't have any. Even though it's annoying, it's still an easy target for several cards that already existed in Cadpool, and even more so thanks to the new additions of this collection that I'll present to you shortly. Monster Reborn is very strong because reviving a monster from the graveyard gives you a huge advantage. So, if you were in Konami's place, would you be satisfied with just one of these in the game? Like, okay, right? We don't really need more options to revive our monsters and speed up our plays. That would only make Pinfall Choice even stronger, which would be a terrible mistake. If you have that perspective, I'm sorry to inform you that Konami strongly disagrees with you, because Premature Burial and Call of the Hunted are here to abuse the dead more than ever. Starting with Premature Burial, an equip spell that, by paying a mere 800 life points, allows you to special summon a monster from your graveyard in attack mode. Call of the Hunted is a continuous trap that doesn't cost any life points to activate, but it also resurrects a monster from the graveyard in attack mode. If any of these cards are destroyed, the summoned monster will also be destroyed, and vice versa. Yes, now we have 3 very good options for recovering monsters from the graveyard. Monster Reborn is the best because it has no cost, can live in any mode, is not limited to summoning them in attack mode, and can even summon monsters from the opponent's graveyard A. But as I said earlier, Painful Choice is very grateful because the more options it has to reuse from the graveyard, the greater its power. Fortunately, we didn't have any equivalent novelty for recovering spells or traps in this product, but Painful Choice suffers from the snowball effect. A reminder of how Konami doesn't think long-term, and this negligence will eventually backfire. Moving on from unnecessarily powerful effects, and going to the simple and sweet Dust Tornado, a trap equivalent to the Space Typhon spell. Destroy a spell or trap with an extra effect that allows you to set a spell or trap directly from your hand. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but basically, this card will be played a lot because of yet another inhumane act in card form that Konami released here. I'll explain what it was in a moment. Light Force Sword and Time Seal were additions to the terrible hand control deck. One trap removes a card from your hand for 4 turns, and another skips your opponent's draw phase, preventing them from drawing a card at the start of their turn. This might not seem like much, but any extra help for this deck, any little push, even a small one, is still a great help, since it focuses on discarding cards little by little. And the fewer resources your opponent has, the better off you are. You might get rid of a staple in their hand that could turn the game against you. Mirror Wall is a very interesting card. It has the attack of attacking monsters. You have the option to pay 2,000 life points to keep it in your standby phase as a cost, or simply destroy this CAD. Boy, it's a good card for its time, but there are many ways to deal with the back row. Even worse, it's useless against a Jinzu, just like any trap, but considering the speed at which monsters are summoned and how advanced the game is, it's something to worry about because unlike Mirror Wall Jinzu, is searchable by the witch. However, it's still a good substitute for the very expensive Miro Force. It's pretty much only rich kids or lucky fools who pulled good stuff from booster packs had those meta slots anyway. So Miro Wall's usefulness is huge for simpler duels and tournaments. Just be careful when your opponent has a competent deck. Several decks are taking shape, becoming more sophisticated and all that. But I believe Konami loves such strategies focused on star burners because in addition to Ground Collapse, we had Ceasefire and Gravity Bind. With the activation of 6 fire, all monsters in defense position are flipped from face down to face up. Flip effects are negated, and for each of these monsters that were flipped, the opponent loses 500 life points, and besides being a good option to get out of the deck, to deal with the flip effects, which are very powerful, Saber Muffin Jar also proves what I said about Muffin Jar second being very good for burner, precisely to set as many monsters as possible and then activate traps more safely. Yeah. Disc Fire now. Gravity Bind is cowardly. Level 4 or higher monsters cannot attack. Another powerful tool to hold up the opponent's turns and eventually burn them to death. Of course, we have countless ways to destroy the back row at this point in the game, but it's that thing. The more options for stall and burner, the better for those who like it, and worse for those who don't play with it. Still talking about burn, we had some new additions, such as School Invitation, which burns 300 life points each time a card goes to the graveyard. Burnland, which doesn't combine with the dragon to attack whatever you want. Okay, Yug, you sneaky thief. Burns 300 life points from players during their standby phases, in addition to destroying field spells that basically nobody uses. Minor Goblin Official, which burns 500 life points during the opponent's standby phase if they have 3,000 or less life points. Attacking Receive, which when you take damage, you retaliate by burning 700 life points from the opponent and an additional 300 for each copy of Attack Receive you have in the graveyard. And lastly, Tarp Zero Magic Crusher, which when discarding a spell from their hand causes an opponent to lose 500 life points. Even with all this support, Bunny didn't improve much in performance. Again, we have genes that practically nullify all of this to show you how dominant this psychic android was. Magic Drain is a cheaper version of Magic Chamber, being rare and all. Both have traps that negate spells, but Magic Drain can be negated if the opponent discards a spell from their hand. It's not the end of the world if this happens, because even if the opponent activated the spell you tried to negate, you had to force them to discard a resource from their hand. So it's not a huge loss. This card is kind of an indirect support for range control, I'd say. Negate spells is the most important thing in old Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they are the strongest cards in the game. Their power level was already very high, so Konami decided to create another way to negate spells in order to balance the game more. The result of this desire was the inclusion of the most authoritarian order possible, the Imperial Order. This is one of those cards that makes me question whether I like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or not, because holy crap, negating all spells, preventing activation, all, for only 700 life points, which at that time you could simply not want to pay on your turn and activate your spells, your spell. In other words, you negate the opponent's spell, and as soon as you are confident that you will win, you don't pay the cost and start bombarding with magic cubes. Imperial Order is one of the most broken, cowardly, and unfair cards in the entire game. That's why they included Denzo and even Tornado in the game. Because if players were only going to defend Myophical Space Typhon, it would be a disaster. At that particular time, the chain mechanics were still very complicated, because it wasn't uncommon for people to say that Imperial Order wasn't affected by Maikasha Typhon. That was that. Imperial is one of the strongest, most aggressive, and anti-game cards in the entire history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it requires a secret rare, which is Jinzo, or a super rare, which is Tornado, all to maintain this peak of balance in the game. And finally, I want to talk about the only fusion monster in this collection, and I'll warn you right away that it's very strong. It's even in the bottom of the summit box. I'm talking about Thousand Eyes Restrict, the classic fusion of the already very strong relic with the effect of absorbing monsters and everything else, but with a bonus, keeping the monsters on the field in their positions, preventing them from changing. Fortunately, it wasn't impactful in this collection, but one day, it will be perfectly usable. Before talking about the decks of that time, I need to show the B list, which was this one. It's important to show it because it will be very important to me, a manual recipe for decks from that era. As always, it's hard to know exactly how the decks from that time were assembled. 2002 was a different time. The internet was still primitive, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community was still very young, and the game was still taking shape. So, back then, there were no deck boxes, sleeves, or anything like that. Just to give you an idea, So, since there are no official records, only players trying to remember the decks from memory, I personally assembled these decks trying to recreate the meta of the time, imperfectly and inaccurately, just like I did in the previous video tempo. Speaking of the previous video, do you remember these 6 decks here? Let's see the upgrades in this collection. Cool, right? It, as I've already said, was incredibly buffed thanks to Jinzo and Goblin Attack Force. And so it continues to be the strongest Yu-Gi-Oh deck for 4 consecutive formats so far. The inclusion of Imperial Order was just to cause widespread panic because, as we all know, the strongest cards in the game remain the power spells. That's why, even though these 6 decks have different objectives, I made sure to include them in the deck lists I put together. There's no reason not to use them. Control, Stun, and Burner had nice additions, but nothing that scratches the surface of Beach Down. Dragon Rush fell a bit behind, thanks to Imperial Order, which negates the main plays of summoning dragons and exchanging spells. Digibun. Relinquished remains interesting because of its extremely good effect. Getting rid of the opponent's Dio is never bad, but again, Imperial Order hurts the strategy too much by negating its main play, which is the Ritual spell. And Control had new toys, as I mentioned earlier, just 2 traps, perfectly negated by the genes, and because of that, something was still missing for the strategy to be taken more seriously. Besides these upgrades, I think it's time to talk about something experimental from that time. 2 new decks. The first is a deck destruction deck. With the inclusion of Cyber and the 2 Muffin Jars, the idea of defeating the opponent by deck out, of clearing all the opponent's deck spaces, was starting to emerge. But something was still missing for this strategy to work. That's why, for now, this strategy is still very experimental, nothing concrete. The second strategy is a different and somewhat cool variant of Bidown, one that focuses on equip spells to buff your Maravado and Rare Busakai blocks. At this time, we have good equip spells. Baravio in particular becomes a monster with 30-50 attack points when equipped with X of Despair. And Rhea Busake, as I mentioned earlier, attacks twice and can finish duels. Just be careful with Imperial Water, because without it, this deck would be more feared. Leaving aside the metagame of that era, and moving on to Time Wizard, let's see how current players view this format, known as Imperial Format, using the card pool from February 2003. Don't worry, what really matters in the metame has already been presented in Fire Servant as a Tide of Preservant. The promo cards I was going to present later weren't impactful for tournaments at all. The decks that use them are Tomato Control, Relinquished, and Exodia. These are the decks whose deck lists are accessible on the site, because the rest, Germ, Burn, Recruit Control, Vanilla Beat, Flip Control, and Machine Beat. Their deck lists are exclusive to paying players or members of this damn site. So without deck lists, folks, I don't have access and I don't want it. For those who want to try this format, the site link is in the description. Good luck and success. Now that I've gotten rid of all this MetaMe madness, let's finish this format in this year of 2002 with the promo cards in me. On December 20, 2002, 2 months following the release of First Servant, McDonald's introduced promotional Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards as a bonus with every Happy Meal purchase. There were 3 CDs containing music from the 4Kids anime, like the opening theme or the background music from the anime itself, that sort of thing. And along with each CD came a small pack containing 2 cards. There could be 15 in total, 14 of which were new, and only 1 was a reprint. They consisted of 10 common cards, 3 super rare cards, and 2 ultra rare cards, none of which were particularly useful, as I mentioned earlier. But for some reason, the kids at the time thought the super rare Dark Piercing Light was good, only to have them change their minds, because that fire card already existed and was undeniably better for dealing with the opponent's tapped effects. New cards and trading cards. So Catapult went from $5.94 to $60, and that's the total number of cards that had been released in Yu-Gi-Oh! For the West, ending the year 2002. But we're not done yet. Before the arrival of the next main collection, Labor of Nightmare, a certain game was released on February 16, 2003, previously released on September 6, 2001 in Japan for the PlayStation 2. A certain Yu-Gi-Oh! Isle of the Roses, a true classic. That, well, you know why? I mentioned this video games in this video series, right? It's to talk about the promo cards and not to trash them. But anyway, this game with one of the best sound effects stars of all time brought us the 3 Magnet Warriors of the Prismatic Secret Yu-Gi-Ohs. So finally, Catapult from that time goes up from 608 to 611. That's it, it's over. It doesn't go up anymore. In this video, at least. Far's Servant was insane. I must admit that even without new mechanics, the additions to Kajipol that he brought were extremely impactful and anything but smooth polar. Regarding the flaws of this format, well, I'll just mention that the 2 secret rings are incredibly necessary for the meta, hyper expensive cards and hyper inaccessible to the average player. One of them in particular is just awful. Imperial Water. I've already talked badly about it enough in this video, so I won't repeat myself. And one last thing, I don't think I'll be able to post episode 5 this year. I'll only post it next year in January. Thus, since this video was about the final format of 2002, and the upcoming collection will cover the year 2003, let's wrap things up here. Next year I'll be back to bring you the next year in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Very poetic, I know. Though, since that's the case, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. No, but that's it. Thank you very much to the Love Peaks Mo, 36 Pranksters, and to Vinicius Nascimento. And also thank you very much to the channel members. Your help is what keeps this channel going. Thank you very much everyone for following along this far. May God always be with you, and until next time.